Clio Mk3 197 Sport rear pad brake change. Now these are the same as the Mk3 RS. So first things first, chock your wheel, use a car lifter, what are they called, a jack. Make sure your car is level, handbrake off, and first things first, got to take the handbrake off. Okay, take the brake calipers off. So it's a 13mm socket for the back nut down there, 15mm ring spanner to stop everything moving around. And I feel that coming off, which is good. Okay, that one's loose. I'll do the other one. Once these bolts are out, and by the way, you get replacement bolts in your brake kit, and I'll go through the brakes that I've chosen when the time comes. Now, what I've got here is not really a meat hook, but that's basically what people suggest that you use, and it's a great idea. So you don't want to put any load on the brake cables if you can help it. So let's pull these pads out. Okay, so you can see that they're down to about 1 mil. Let's have a look at the other one. Again, down to about 1 mil, maybe a millimeter. So absolutely time for a change. And I think I can hear rubbing on the other side. Now what's important is I need to line these up with the replacement pads. And these are the replacement pads. So they are, I'll put a part number up if you're interested. These were $92 at Repco, and with a NRMA discount they were $87. And the other thing that we can see, and this is going to be important for our wind back tool, is the shape of the inside of the piston. Onto the brake caliper, there we go, nice. So I've just used 2 hooks, easy. And you can see how far that piston is extended out. Now what I've got is I'm just going to pull the guides out. And I've got a little cheat sheet here for top and bottom, just so that when I pull out these guide pins here, which are feeling quite springy, but I'm going to re-lube them anyway with some high temperature silicone grease, I know which is the top and which is the bottom. There you go, that's one. So that's top, and again, not looking too bad, but I'll clean them up anyway, and bottom. Alright, so thank you Wuhan, got plenty of masks. Put your specs on, and we're just going to give the rotor and the brake caliper a bit of a clean up. Now to clean these up, I'm just holding one end in a pair of pliers, getting a wire brush. Now with these pins, I'm just going to do the bottom one as an example. The boot slides off like that. Now I can actually see some pretty good grease on there, but look, I've started, so I will finish. As they say, I'm mastermind.
I've started, so I will finish.
So I'm just going to clean that up, put some more silicone grease on, and be ready to go. Now when you're doing this, don't put a huge glob on the end there, because grease is incompressible and you want to lubricate the shaft, but you don't want to form a liquid seal towards the end there. So I know this was the bottom, so slide that in, put the boot on, and my glove hasn't even lasted this long, but that's nice. Probably just as good as it was when I pulled it out, but you can see this top one's a bit grittier, a bit crappier, so I'll clean that one up as well. Right, that top one is done as well. Nice, boing, springy. Okay, now for the piston itself. Just keep working away at this till it's nice and clean, and when you're about to put the boot in, so to speak, just lift the boot out of the way. It's only a dust cover. Get some WD and just work that around, just so that it can spin freely and it doesn't get hung up. Alright, now it's time to wind back the boot. For that, I've actually bought a wind back toolkit. I thought for $23, why not? I'll use it to do other vehicles. I've got a Subaru, an 07 Forester that this will be good for. I believe these are both clockwise, so you've got a clockwise and a counterclockwise screw thread here, holding plate, and then different templates that you've got to match up to the plate. So it doesn't give you any guides, you just have to kind of work out which one's going to be correct. So I'll have a bit of a play with that. A number 6 seems to fit in here absolutely perfectly. So the main thing is to make sure that it plunges or it winds back absolutely plumb or true. So if you've got any kind of offset, it's going to cause you a problem. Again, this is why you cannot film and do mechanical work. Now there's all sorts of conjecture here whether you should use the nipple tool. I'm just getting, you can see I'm halfway getting the nipple cover off, the bleed nipple. There you go, don't lose that. Or whether you let the fluid go back all the way through the system into the master reservoir in the bonnet. Now, I am going to try and crack this bleed nipple. People say that they do crack off. The reason I'm doing that is I don't want to flush any crap back through these fine capillary brake lines all the way through the system, and I'm going to end up doing 4 brakes, all of which are pretty stuffed. So basically I don't want to flush bad fluid back through the system. I would prefer to add more fluid and bleed it out here, which means I'm doing a partial flush of the system anyway. Alright, so I got it's actually a bit of rubber tubing from an old washing machine. Now the other reason that you want to have fresh brake fluid, and that is just going to go into a glass jar like so. There we go, just on the ground there. The other reason that you want fresh brake fluid is because brake fluid is hygroscopic, so it absorbs moisture, and eventually you could end up with tiny water droplets in your brake system, and that means rust on your brakes. And you can see I've got a bit of a work mat here, but another reason to basically to use, if you're going to use this method here, which is to keep everything local and not run it back up through the master reservoir in the bonnet, is this keeps the system liquid locked, and you absolutely want to keep it liquid locked, because if you get an air bubble in your brakes, you get spongy brakes and it's all over. So that's loose. I've loosened it up with an 11mm socket. So that's, I'm just hand turning that, and I'll now compress the brake piston or wind it back. Now, even though it doesn't really matter because the back of the pads do not have matching slot alignment, so that it doesn't matter which way they go back in, but you should always try and keep that orientation the same, so that when the pad goes back in, it's facing the same way on the piston. So this is why you take a video or a photo with your phone, and you can remember which way the piston was looking when you started to wind it back, and that's the position you want to finish in. So put my little alignment tool on like so, hold that with one hand, put that in, there you go, it's lined up. Make sure that's as plumb as we can make it. Now when you're doing this, make sure that that is flush on the outside of the caliper holder on the frame. So you wind this out by hand, and then I can screw this in, remembering of course to release the bleed nipple, which is only needs to be half a turn. Got to use a shifter just to hold that, just so that it doesn't rotate, so that it actually screws in. If you can see in there that the piston is basically almost fully compressed in. So I might actually try and see, and you can also see that the brake fluid has been indeed coming out, and there's about 5 or 6 mil in the bottom there. So I'm going to nip that brake fluid nipple up, and if the piston is retracted enough, then happy days, I'll put the new pads in and we're done. So just opening up the brake pads, looks like they give you actual, here we go, less than 4 mil, you should change them. Yeah, that's great, mine are down about 0 mil. You do get some nice pre-Loctited retaining bolts. I've got some old 277 here. Thank you, Newcastle BHP Steelworks, from closed in 1999. It probably does have a use by date. Okay, so last checks. Nipple's got to be done up. Check the alignment as it was when I pulled it out, and I'll put the pads in. Basically, these are the pads that are out, so you can double check that they're identical, and indeed they are identical. So put some copper grease on. I did buy some copper grease especially for this job. About the lowest amount you can buy, 100 grams, about $20 online. So bentonite clay, and we'll grease up the right components and then we'll reassemble. I'm just going to use a little bit of copper grease, essentially on the wetted parts. Slides in like so, and I've got a new pair of gloves on. You don't want to get copper on your skin. Basically, don't believe me, ask Marie Curie. She was exposed to radium and she died. Now you can see that these are not absolutely mirror finish, but basically they've got most of the gunk off. And I'm just going to use a little screwdriver just to lever that in place. Perfect. Now do a test fit of the pads. Now you got to make sure, of course, that nothing contacts that working face. You get a little bit of copper grease on the insides of these as well. There's like a bit of a waste. You use about 2 grams of this stuff, and that's 2. And you got to buy 100 grams. Now you make sure the springs, if you can, are in the top dead center position, and then you can slide the caliper back on, and hopefully this will fit. And indeed it fits. Now what we'll do is we'll put one of the new holding bolts in at the top, and then do that one up, and then we'll do the other one.
Fun.
Now I've actually borrowed a torque wrench. Again, get your 15mm ring just to hold that in, and then I'll put the bottom bolt in. So what I'm trying to show with this video is that you can absolutely do this by yourself with the right tools. You can see that those springs are in the correct position. You just have to be careful, take the time, and it is worth buying things like wind back tools and things like that. So now I'm going to get my trusty torque wrench, which I've borrowed from a neighbour, and I will do the nuts up at the back, or the bolts up at the back, sorry, to 32 Newton meters, which is factory torque. A lot of people don't bother, but I'm going to bother because I've got a torque wrench. So it's nip tight at the back, nip tight at the top. Go and get my torque wrench, make sure it's all tickety-boo. And also, don't forget to put the grease nipple cap back on the bleed nipple, sorry. Grease nipple, bleed nipple. Last little job on this side is to bring that forward, which is the handbrake. There we go. That's in place. Get rid of my hook. And we are done. Now the rotors are a little bit rusty. Now these are within the wear limits, and you'll notice that I've put the original rotors back on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive this very carefully for maybe 50, 100 kilometers just to gently bed these brakes in. I haven't pumped them yet because I've got to do the other side. Alright, so this is the left hand side, the passenger side, the correct side, because we drive on the correct side in Australia. Push that in, flick the handbrake out like so, and now we can start to dismantle the brakes per the drive side. So this is identical, bolts out, top and bottom, handbrake off, wiggle the caliper off, and I've got my trusty hook. These were rubbing, so I suspect they're down to metal. Not quite. It's pretty bad. Bad driver, bad. And then that one, yeah, that's pretty bad, down to metal. Time for a change. So that's the top one. That's looking not too bad. Still see some clear grease at the top. Put that on my little ready reckoner marker. Bottom one, again, pretty clean, but I'll give these a bit of a clean, put them back in. Now, also give this a really good wire brush. Pop these off. Now these appear to be perfectly symmetrical, but I'm keeping the boots in the right orientation just in case these boots are not perfectly symmetrical. Now I'm just going to give the inside of the caliper a bit of a clean, and then the real reason I wanted to make this video is that no one is really able to tell me, or was able to tell me, whether or not this was a clockwise wind back or a counterclockwise wind back. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I just got a screwdriver in under the boot. Just going to give it a very, very light work around just with some WD. There we go, just to make sure that it's not going to catch on the boot. So I finally got this thing in. It was out a little bit further because the pads were slightly more worn, but you can see that I'm trying to make sure that is square on that alignment there. So again, just proving that is definitely clockwise. Sometimes this slips, so you've got to use a shifter to hold it in place. This one was very, very, very tight, so I had to use a pry bar to give myself a little bit of leverage on this 3-inch mechanical advantage. And that is all the way in. Now, pull this out and pull that out. And again, just double check that is almost in the right position. I'll just rotate that around a little bit, just so that it is that they're 12 and 6. Reverse of the other side, reassemble, and we'll pump the brakes, we'll put the handbrake back on, and we'll put everything back together, and I'll go for a bit of a drive. Now you can see I've put some copper grease on the wetted areas, the wetted parts. Just put the holding clip in. A little flat blade screwdriver is good for this job. And 2, righto, so that's in. I'll do all those up and we'll do some testing. Giddy up, new brakes. Righto, final checks on the passenger side. Make sure your handbrake lug is in. Make sure your bleed nipple is done up if you've used the bleed nipple, and make sure you've torqued up your 2 retaining bolts with the new bolts. And you see a little bit of copper grease in that crack there maybe. And the springs look like they're seated properly. Yeah, we'll spin all that crap off. We're going to take it for a very light drive in a minute. Okay, so the brake reservoir is at the maximum line. You can have a look in there. And I'm just going to go and pop the pedal a few times, ratchet up the handbrake, and we'll go for a bit of a test drive. Oh yeah, baby! Now I'm going to go and have a look and see if there's been any depletion of the reservoir. Anyway, go for a gentle test drive.